Today's video is a step-by-step tutorial on how I built what I'm calling a reminder card box. It's a relatively basic hinged lid box with a divider and then a bunch of wooden cards that I have chosen to paint, at least, though you could do whatever you like, reminders on for common things I do. My desk is always cluttered with pieces of paper, things I commonly do, but I also would forget otherwise if not reminded. So I've got things like mow the front lawn, mow the back lawn, weed whack, dishwasher, all those kinds of things. And it keeps it in a relatively nice kind of contained box that I can keep away or keep on the corner of my desk and only pull them out when I need to. A few mistakes were made along the way, but I'm extremely happy with how it turned out in the end. If you have any questions, please ask, and I hope you enjoy the video. First on the list, we're going to cover the dimensions. Now, the end goal here is, for me, something kind of more delicate. It's going to be a box like this, except the correct dimensions. I made this prior. I didn't like the size of the cards. I'm enlarging it, but it's going to be very similar to this for me. Now, you may want to increase the thickness or decrease the thickness of the box. So all of my dimensions are based on 3/8 of an inch thick wood. I'm taking out of this piece of elm. You can use whatever wood you want. So let's head over here. I'll show you the internal and external dimensions. Here are the dimensions, interior, exterior. Now, I am having 2 rows and there will be a divider in the middle. My height is going to be 4 inches, and all of this is based around cards that are going to be 4 by 2.5. That is the size I'm looking for in the end. I want a little bit of wiggle room on the width so that when I get these cards out, I have no problem getting them out. So for 2.5 inch cards, I'm going with 2 rows that are 2 5/8 of an inch. That means the whole thing with 3/8 of an inch wood is going to be 5 5/8 internally. I will keep the divider that same 3/8 of an inch wood. And then externally, when we add the thickness of that wood, we are over here to 6 3/8 external and 5 1/4 external. It's relatively basic. If you want to copy my exact dimensions, this is what I'm going to go with. You can play with the height however you want. If you want to make it taller, obviously it can't be a whole lot shorter, but if you'd like to make it taller, that's fine. I'm going with 5 inches because I'm going to actually have this in a drawer and I don't want it to be huge. I'm going to lop the top off at a specific height for the lid so that the cards fit in there. Let's go and mill up the wood. Step number 2, we are going to mill up this wood. Now, I am taking this all out of a big chunk of elm from a tree I cut down from a neighbor's or cut up and milled myself. If you want to make this out of Home Depot pine, that's totally fine. We'll do the resawing. We'll just do it on the table saw here. I know a lot of people don't have a bandsaw. If you don't have a joiner or a planer, that's totally fine. I've made a lot of different things, resawing straight from pine boards. Even to this day, I still do it if it's not something final and important and I don't want to waste wear and tear on the planer blades. But this step for me, I'm going to use the tools I own. I'm going to use my little benchtop joiner and my planer sled. Anything is going to help the flatter you can get, even if that just means being a little more selective at the hardware store when you pick out your lumber or the lumber store. So I'm going to do it one way. There are plenty of ways to mill wood. If you don't have any way to mill and you're just going straight from this, skip ahead to where we do the resaw and you can start from there. All right, we're going to hit the benchtop jointer here. Just remember, if you are relatively new to using a little jointer or any jointer, or you don't do it much, if you can identify the grain that crests like a wave, we want it to flow from up to down as we're going into the jointer. And then if we're at the planer, we just want to go the other way where it's coming down to up, and you will have much less tear out that way and a much easier time. We are now at the resaw phase. Now, I'm a bit unique in that I'm taking it out of this big chunk of wood. I'm going to get everything I need, base, lid, all of that from here. If you, however, are using pre-cut 3/4 of an inch wood, or you don't have a planer or a thick piece of wood, whatever, that's totally fine. So the way I'm personally going to do this, and most of you won't have a big thick chunk that you're taking it all out of, I'm going to resaw on the table saw here, pick a face, keep it inward. We're going to do the rotating method, always keeping that same face inward until we are all the way through. I'm going to raise the saw blade about 1 inch at a time with each pass and keep going until I get all the way through. Now for me at that point, because I am taking it out of this, I'm gonna then run to the planer, and with the remaining larger chunk left over, I'm gonna just skim past that to make that nice and clean again. This does leave a little bit of blade mark kind of on the piece, so it's not perfectly flat and smooth again when I want to go run it at the side. I have the planer, I'm going to use it. Okay, fine. That's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to get 3 slices as I'm making the top and bottom too. This is about 13.5 inches long. I've determined that including top and bottom, I will need 3 slices. So what is that, 41-ish, 40.5 inches total is what I will be using. Okay, fine. Let's say you're not doing it that way because you don't have a big block of wood. Let's say you don't even have the planer. You're here because you skipped ahead. Well, you have 2 options. The first option is that you don't care about saving money or anything. You are going to set your fence 3/8 of an inch and a little bit, a couple taps further away, somewhere under a 32nd, but a little over a 64th. So just a tap or 2 depending upon how heavy your fence is. You are going to use the same method, though I suggest you pay attention to which side is either flatter or whichever one has that kind of concave, because it's better, in my opinion, to have that up against the fence as that doesn't rock. So you are going to have whatever the flatter or more concave side is up against the fence, you are going to go through just like this, and you are going to get your pieces out of it that way. If you have the kind of convex side up against the fence, it can do one of these as you're going through, and it leaves a really messy surface. I don't think it's particularly safe. So that's why I suggest the convex side. But ideally, whichever one is closer to flat is going to go up against there. You will end up with your pieces, and I highly suggest you are going to look at them and you're going to want to sand them. And that is fine, but do not sand them a ton. If you want to hit it with some 150 grit to get those kind of blade marks out of there so you can look at it, do not go crazy removing material. When we cut the miters and glue them together, for them to glue together as well as possible, it's pretty important they're all the same size, same thickness, and we will be doing some finish sanding of the inside before we glue. So we don't want to go crazy right now. You can leave them totally as is if you don't want to do any sanding. Just if you do sanding, don't go nuts. Let's say you want to save some money. You're like me, you're a penny pincher. You've got only some 3/4 inch stock. Okay, well there is an option here, and it's an option to make a slight change to the aesthetics. Instead of 3/8 of an inch thick on all the sides, what if we did more like 5/16 of an inch, give or take, something like that? And what we would need to do for this is the same resaw method, but all we are aiming to do is hit the dead middle on the middle of the piece of wood and the middle of the saw blade so that we have basically even side pieces either way. And that way we can use less wood total. We get 2 pieces out of a single 13.5 inch long or whatever length your piece is here. It saves money. It's thinner. It doesn't really matter to me. If you like that aesthetic, that's totally fine. I just chose 3/8 of an inch. So that's a money saving way. I love doing that for certain things, splitting the board in half and saving money. If you want to do that, cool. If you let me put it this way. If you are struggling to hit the dead middle on the blade and the piece of wood, I highly suggest, because we want these to be even thicknesses throughout, you actually set the blade a little closer on the inside, or set the fence. So the inside cut, your workpiece cut, is going to be a little narrower actually. We're a little further in from center. And what we're going to do then is we're going to run it through just like normal. We've got the blade at 1 inch or so here. We've got it through, made our first pass. Now normally we would raise the blade and go through again. However, because we can't quite hit the dead middle, we're going to then flip it around and use the other face. We're going to ignore the very specific rule of always keeping the face to the same side. And the reason we set it slightly thinner is that since that external piece will now be slightly thicker, if we turn that face and face it in, it will run through there and that blade will shave off the remaining amount, and they will be 2 equal pieces. They will both be thinner than whatever directly in the middle of 3/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch with your saw blade, but they will be identical. So that is one method. If you want to save money and you're struggling to hit the dead middle, flip it around the other way too for every time you go through. All right, I'm gonna resaw this and we'll come back afterward. I just wanted to add this in as a note, as this kind of was a thought I had and I'm going to end up doing it. I've got my two side pieces here at a little over 3/8, which I will be planing down later. Maybe you're not planing, you've got yours ready to go. Anyways, I'm going to make the lid out of the same stuff. There's no reason for me to make it 3/8 of an inch and then plane it down. My final lid thicknesses are going to be somewhere between 1/4 inch and 5/16. It doesn't really matter. I normally do my grooves for the base and the lid on the router. I have a 1/4 inch router bit. Since these are miters, you can do these on the table saw, of course, so any thickness you want for your lid. If you don't have a planer, you can do this now. You can come back later when we do the lid portion and do the resaw it there. I'm going to do this somewhere, kind of just split the difference between 1/4 inch and 5/16. I won't even bother planing the lid down. I will just sand off the grooves and stuff. So if you want to just do this all in a row, you can get your lid piece mostly kind of roughly done at this point. It's day 2 for me now. Ideally what you have are a lid piece that's somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 5/16 of an inch, and then two pieces that will make up our sides that are then 3/8 of an inch or whatever thickness you're going to do. Now these are still straight from the resaw. I'm going to plane these down. If you don't have a planer, do not go crazy with sanding these right now. And in fact, if you don't want to sand them at all, you can always use this cleaner side as your face down. And what I'm talking about here is we're going to cut the miters in a minute. And it is very important to get good miters that we have a flatter face on the bottom that's on the sled or the miter gauge, table saw top, whatever you're using, so that we don't have any rocking back and forth as we go through that cut. So if you have one side that's a little rough and you don't want to do any sanding or you don't have a planer, whatever, go ahead and just leave that. That can just be the outside, and when we do sanding later, it'll clean right up. If you do need to do a little sanding, because I know for some people it's hard to look at slightly, saw marked boards or something like that, don't go crazy. And then make sure for now, we're just going to set the lid piece aside. Don't accidentally cut that or do anything to that yet. We will get that all cut down to size after we've cut all of our grooves, so we don't have to try to pre-measure and guess. We can just fit it to whatever our groove is. Now that I've got these down to 3/8 of an inch, we're going to go do the miters. Now there's one decision to make here. My process of doing miters is I cut this to the correct final width, 5 inches here, which will be our height. Then I kind of mark out roughly where my box piece sides are. This isn't a square for me, so I've got to pay attention. I do a cross cut. I'm just kind of rough cross cutting it there. I'm not cross cutting it to final length. I do my final length cut with the miters themselves. We're going to set this lid aside and make sure we don't accidentally cut that at all. However, if you are new to miters or you don't do them a lot, or you have a lower tooth saw blade, like a 40 tooth or under, and you're worried about tear out, let's say you've got a 5.5 inch board here, you haven't cut it to final width yet, you can do the miters first and then rip off a section. And if you've got some tear out, some chipping of that fine miter corner, that can oftentimes clear it right up. Yes, you do risk some tear out too, or some chipping if you've got a great corner. So there's a little bit of risk, a little bit of reward. If you've got a low tooth blade though, I highly suggest taking the miters first, then ripping it off and being relatively delicate when you're ripping it off. It's just going to give you a better chance. However, I do it normally 60 tooth blade, and I always stick some blue tape over it, and it works really well. So I'm going to cut this to 5 inches now. I'm going to rough cross cut it. I'm going to mark out where that cut is because I'd like to keep each of the two sides together. Then we're going to do the miters. In case it is at all confusing what I mean by rough crosscut, I know I need two pieces out of each side, one that is 6 3/8 and one that is 5 1/4. This is 13.5 inches long. I know for sure I have to square out both ends here, so that will be 2 cuts. And because I want to keep a continuous grain, I want to have a cut somewhere in the middle here that allows me to have extra room on both sides. I don't want to cut 2 pieces out that are at final length, or else then when I go to make my miters, I have to dial it exactly on. I'd rather have a little wiggle room. I like the look of this grain flowing this way, so I'm going to have a long side and a short side. So I'm going to just I'm picking somewhere off to the side here. And I know there's 6 3/8. Okay, that's fine. So I want to cut those somewhere outside of that. So we'll just call that there. And now I want 5 1/4. Okay, I'm going to leave a little wiggle room here on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Somewhere 5 1/4 right there. So I'm going to make my rough cross cut in between here. And then I am going to have these matching. I like to draw this on here so I can keep these together. That is what I mean by keeping them together and making a rough crosscut. I've still got wiggle room on either side, and I have that match in the middle. Throwing on a 60-tooth blade, and then we will set this saw to 45 degrees. Oh, overshot it. 45.1. We are so close. Let's just go a little down. All right, let's give it up. She's a bit temperamental sometimes. Sometimes these are so hard to press without moving it. I don't get it. Ah, all right, good to go. I've always been partial to a miter sled, so that's what I'm going to use. However you want to cut these, that is totally fine. Miter gauge, perfectly fine as well. I just like the ability to kind of hold with both hands and apply pressure with fingers instead of having to kind of do one of these. Personal preference. And my order of operations here is very specific because I have marked out on all of these the middle mating pieces cut. I'm going to go through on all of these and put a single miter on the side that is going to be the mating piece, and I'm going to try to remove as little material as possible. These really come in handy, just striking a line down and trying to match exactly where that is. I strike from the edge and I'm just trying to remove that line. The less material I remove from this end, the more these will exactly match. So I'm going through, I'm going to put one miter on all of them on this side, and then we will cut to specific lengths overall. We don't want to do this separately or else we can lose track and accidentally remove too much material from one of these sides and they don't match anymore. At this point, you have 4 pieces all with 1 miter on them. Separate the 2 short sides and the 2 long sides. Our final aiming of external dimensions. So from the tip of the miter to the tip of the other miter will be 5 1/4 on the short pieces and then 6 3/8 on the long pieces. It's very important that it's from the external. If you do it from the internal, it'll be way too big. I'm going from the tip of the miter. I'm going to mark out 5 1/4 on the face. And then I'm just going to use one of these and carry it down, and I'm going to look to remove the line. I really like having one of these. They don't have to be the most accurate thing in the world. We're not relying on it for the 45. We've got the saw blade cut at that. We're relying on it for positioning. That's really all we're doing here. That way you get exactly that cut. You will set your stop block when you go to make this so that the next one, there's no measuring. You just put it in and you make that cut. Once you have done both of these, we will then go and do the next 2, the longer ones. Remember, 6 3/8, same process, and we will end up with 4 sides with miters on both, and we're getting close to something resembling a box. At this point, I think we have passed the hardest phase, which is the miters. So much has to go right. They can be really annoying, really finicky, really frustrating. Hopefully everything is worked out. Now you should have 4 pieces that are all at their final length. If, as before I mentioned, you didn't do the final ripping to width, which is the height of the box, because you were worried about some tear out, go ahead and do that now. Get these all to 5 inches in width, which is our height, so that we have them finally dimensioned of length and width. We are now going to do the base and lid grooves. So the first thing we're actually going to do is set aside these 4 pieces, and we're going to grab our piece that we are using for the lid and the base. I highly suggest using real wood for both. If you want to use plywood for the base or both, whatever, that's fine. Let's assume you're doing hardwood though, or real solid wood. I'll just call it that. Plywood is real wood, I get it. We're going to sand this all the way up to the grit before our final grit. So let's say you were going to 220, you're going to do 150, 180, stop, or whatever it is. The grit before your final grit, I go pretty high. I like to even burnish these. But the reason we're doing that is we need to know pretty much where the thickness of this is so that when we cut our grooves, we don't have any surprises later. If we were to cut it now and then sand a bunch, it'll be all loose and floppy in there. It won't look good. We want to get it really close, and then right before we glue it up, we want to do that last grit sanding in case there are any minor scratches on there, and then put it in. Now, it's not really super important that there is a precise thickness to this. There are only 2 measurements we really need to pay attention to, and that is establishing the lip on the top and the bottom. I like to set my lids and bases inside of a groove on the inside of the box. And there are only 2 measurements because the first 2 cuts are going to establish the top of the lip, both from the bottom and the top. we're going to have a slightly different amount on either side. I like to have a slightly thicker lip on the bottom. And for that, I'm going to start in a little under 1/8 of an inch from the bottom. So I'm establishing that first line, and everything cut after that will be up towards the top of the box. We want to establish that first cut and then move in to fit to our base. And like I said, it doesn't really matter what it is, we're just going to fit. So a little under 1/8 from the bottom, as there's going to be some weight on there. I like a little more meat. On the top, however, I only go about a 1/16 plus a little bit, maybe 3/32, something there. I think a little reveal, but not like super deep, looks really good there. So you're going to make that first cut to establish that outer barrier, and then everything after that is going to be moving in towards the bottom of the box. I highly suggest marking all of this out as to which is which. It can get very confusing. Fortunately, these aren't a square, these are a rectangle, so we're not going to get super confused, but mark all of this out. I will show you how I do this on the table saw, and then I'm going to do this on the router. Here is a closer look. We are inside of this box here. This part that's remaining is what I call the lip. There is a lip on the top and the bottom. Don't look at that. I didn't say on the bottom there. And that holds it inside of that groove. For those of you who don't have a router table and are going to do this at the table saw, here's how we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay out our 4 pieces in order, and we're going to decide what is the top and the bottom. I just make a little T and a B on all of them on both sides. So then we flip them all over again, and we make sure there's no way that we forget which side is the top and which side is the bottom. Now for aligning our grooves, we only need to pick one of these. We don't need to mark things out on all of them. And you're going to come around to one of the miters here. Now it's easiest when we're lining this up with a saw blade to be able to look at it like this and have our line here, our saw blade over here actually, and mark that up. So this here is the top. So here I want a little under a 1/16 coming in. So I'm going to come down and I'm just going to make that mark. And my first cut is going to be to the right of that. And I'm never going to cut above that, or else we will lose the ability to insert the groove there. And then I will come down to this side, but I'm going to do it on this one here on the opposite angle, and I'll show you why. And we're going to just mark a little under 1/8 of an inch. And now we've got our 2 marks. These don't have to be exact in any way, just make sure you can see them. Now remember, you will have sanded this to the second to last grit so that we can do directly fitting from it. If you want to cut it into half of your 2 pieces, go ahead and do that. Ideally, it'll be the same thickness either way. Now what I prefer to do here, let me find my piece. Okay, there it is I like to cut away from the fence. I like to keep this thing as far away as humanly possible from the blade unless I have to have it there. So I'm going to bring my blade up. I only want to go, I don't know, we'll call it 1/8 of an inch or so in there. This groove does not need to be particularly deep. Make sure you do not cut all the way through. I then am going to come over here, and because I've lined this up on the top here, I can line up my blade with this mark. Now I want the entirety of the blade to be inside of the mark. I do not want to remove the mark. I do not want to take anything to the left of the mark. I want the entirety of the blade inside to the right. I can lock that down, and then when I go to run this over now, I don't have to try to like line this up from underneath. I'm able to just do it here. And since these are slightly different, one is a little under 1/8, one is a little over a 1/16, we're going to do them at separate times. So you will go through and you will run all 4 of your pieces through the tops. Let's just say you started with the top. And then once you have made one pass for all of the tops, we're going to come back and we are going to move the blade, or excuse me, we're going to move the fence towards the blade. That way we stay away from that edge, and we've still kept our fence further away, and we're going to make that second cut. Now, depending upon your thickness here and the thickness of your blade, you may be starting to get somewhere in the realm of the right fit. So you're going to start checking this. Anytime it doesn't fit, go through and make all of your cuts on, let's say again, you started with the top, come again, just give it a little nudge. If you want to stop and even measure it out directly, go ahead, but a little nudge once you get close, it's not going to be the end of the world, and eventually that will fit in there. Now we want a slight bit of movement, but not a ton here. This is not a sliding lid box. It doesn't need to slide in and out, but we also want to have it so that we don't have to mallet this thing in there somehow. We want to have it a pressure fit going in there. If your wood is severely cupped or twisted, you're going to need a little extra room, just a little extra, so make it even wider by a little bit. Once you have got the top to fit, you're going to go around and do the exact same thing on the bottom. You're going to line it up again with your line, coming back out, flip over, boom, make that cut, go all the way through until the bottom fits, and you are good to go. I'm about to do my router lid and base groove right now. Now remember, we've sanded our lid and base material to the second to final grit, so we are really close to the final size. But there's two things we need to check beforehand. One, if it's all in one piece, we need to cut this somewhere roughly in half or whatever so that it roughly fits your box's kind of dimensions. We want it over, obviously, we're gonna do the final trimming later, but get two pieces that are going to be big enough. The second is you need to look down the sides of this thing. When you're using a random orbit sander, any power sander, it's very easy to kind of have it coming over the edge and rounding over. And since we're going to be using this to actually do the test fitting, what we do not want is to have those rounded over edges be used to test fit. We end up getting way further in the process. We go to glue it together, but then we've ripped this down to size and suddenly it's thicker than it was at the edge, and glue is on there. We are getting ready to close it up and we cannot fit it in there. So if this is rounded over as in it comes down more narrow like that, just take a skim pass with the table saw, and then I'm gonna just cut this roughly in half and get my lid and base grooves. It's really easy to check if you've got kind of a rough, just stick it on there. Okay, good, it fits. Chop it where it needs to be. Now, before making these bottom and top grooves, I need to do a little kind of organization because these are different for me. Top is a little bit thinner of a lip and the bottom is a little bit thicker. If you want to make them identical, you don't have to be as organized. They're all going to be the same. But for me, I need to make sure I have them all aligned correctly so I don't accidentally do one when it should be the other. I like to get out a straight edge and I just like to arrange. It doesn't matter if it's the right order, just all of the tops, all of the bottoms, so that when I pick them up, I can come over, I can run it, and then I can go back. So if you're starting with the bottom, I like to face all the bottoms in that way so I can just quite literally go straight from, then we'll rotate them around when we go to do the tops. At this point, you need to pick one of your two pieces and pick the bottom and the top. It doesn't matter which, that's aesthetics, that's up to you. What are you thinking here? Probably go with this guy for the top. I'm going to start with the bottom here, so I'm going to bring the bottom over. Everything here is referenced off of this. I'm not really measuring the width of this groove. We're going to measure exactly where our initial starting cut is, and then everything after that is just going to be moving the fence to fit. Now, it's a little different on the router table because the router, when it's in a table upside down, spins counterclockwise, and we always want to be feeding into that spinning bit, meaning we actually need to start with our fence really close. It's going to be the lip starting cut that is between the bit and the fence, so I'll bring you in closer here and show you what I mean. I'm going to bring this up about a 1/16 of an inch. Now, obviously, make sure this is unplugged before you do this part, and I mean definitely unplugged. I'm going to turn it so that we have the cutters facing directly towards the fence. I'm going to bring my fence in, and because I'm starting with the bottom, I'm going to be doing a little under 1/8 of an inch. Now, the order of operations here is important. We are going to do all of the cuts for the bottom all the way through once, and then we are going to move the fence back. We do not want to bring it closer. That is, unlike the table saw where we can come closer or further depending upon how we want to cut it, we're going back here, as that way the bit is always spinning counterclockwise and we are then feeding into it. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to make that first cut our established kind of boundary cut, and then we will take our piece and just kind of lay it on there and just give an eyeball of where we need to get to. And we just keep going until we get close, and then we start checking one bit at a time whether it fits or not. I'm noticing that this cupped a lot. Look at this thing. That's so bad. I wonder if this wasn't... Well, whatever. We're going to continue. We only need to go in height a little over 1/8 of an inch. This groove doesn't need to be super deep. I've gone through, I've got all my base grooves done to 1/8 of an inch deep. I'm just going to leave it there. I think that's totally fine for this. You can go a little over, don't go too much over. Now I just need to know kind of where are we at roughly. And because I'm using a 1/4 inch router bit and I had this somewhere between 1/4 and 5/16, I don't have a long ways to go. I'm just going to kind of press it up in there. Now there's definitely a bit of a cup in this, so I know I'm going to need to leave a little extra room, as one of these sides is going to, when it tries to shove in there, be higher than the other two. So I'm going to make just a little, we're going to call that probably 32nd of an inch push back here, and we're going to see where that gets us. Remember, you have to push the fence backwards in order to make the groove wider this way. Now, you can either go right away and make this cut in 1/8 of an inch, or you can go back down. I think 1/8 of an inch is a perfectly fine depth, especially in a router table, so I'm not going to lower it. We're going to make that first cut, we're going to check, and basically we're going to go on the initial piece until we get the fit right, then run the rest of them through. I just wanted to show you quickly, if you are using hardwood or just solid wood and you get it thinner, oftentimes it will cup. And this is what that looks like. I can get this edge in there fine, but if I try to push in the entire thing, I have to give it some force. It fits, that's okay, but when I go to clamp this box together, I'm only using blue tape. I don't want a ton of force resisting, so I'm going to just enlarge this groove just a little bit so that even though I can get that in there, I don't want to have to force it in there. Just a little bit until it slides in there. You could also tackle this if you want by sanding down the middle or sanding the edges in. That's totally fine too. I like to just leave it as is and make my groove a little bit wider. Once you are satisfied with the fit of your base groove, set the base aside, and we will now do the top groove. It's going to be the identical process, except we're going to start with the fence in a little closer. Like I said before, I like to do a little over a 1/16. I think an even shallower kind of reveal, or I don't know what that's called. I'll call it a reveal. Looks a little better on the lid, and we don't have to worry about any weight being put on it, so it doesn't matter if it's thin, but you do have to be careful once you do it not to crack it. And if you make this deeper and deeper, it's going to be more and more fragile. Make sure it is the same depth as the bottom groove as well, so that when we go to cut these to fit, we can have them be the same dimensions. Now that we have the top groove and the bottom groove done for our lid and our base, we're going to do the groove for the divider in the middle. Now, you can see this is already done on mine. This is the second time I'm attempting this because I lost or didn't have the audio for the entire first time through. I want to say up front, if you don't like this method, which is going to involve putting this groove now and gluing up this divider piece in place, it will be permanent. You will not be able to get it out. You can skip this entire part, and at the very end, you're going to go through, you're going to skip this, you're going to glue up the box, you're going to cut the lid off, you're going to do the hinges, etc., all that. You will simply make a cross lap, half lapped divider that will go in the middle. All you will lose is, instead of 2 straight back rows, you will have 4 quadrants, and therefore you will lose probably 1 to 2 reminder cards worth of thickness. I designed this for like 10 of them, so it's not the biggest deal. You may not need 10 anyways. I'll bring you in closer to show you this in case you have no idea what I'm talking about. It is a very basic, though, half lap divider. You will have the square box. You can just set that in there. You don't even have to glue it in. If it's tight enough, it will hold itself indirectly in place. And perhaps in the future, if you want to use the box for something else because you no longer need reminders, you can just pull it right out. In case you've made it this far, but you have no idea what I'm talking about and you want to do this alternative method, you're going to have 2 pieces of wood, identical thickness or really darn close. One is going to be the internal length of the sides. One will be the length of the internal of the front and back. You will go in directly in the middle of each of these, and you will cut out a groove that is equal in thickness to the other piece. So these should be identical. So the identical piece, they will then slot through. That groove needs to be a little over halfway through so that when you go to seat them, they line up flush. You will then just insert this at the end straight into the middle. And like I said, instead of 2 rows, you now have 4 quadrants, but it will work either way. You don't really lose any width, as this groove or this divider will be the same 3/8 of an inch if you make it so, and you'll have the same space. For those of you wishing to do the groove for the divider, this is what it will look like when it is done. I use the same depth as the base and top grooves of 1/8 of an inch. I simply used my plunge router. I wrote it up against the edge here. I went up 3 1/4 of an inch. That way a 4-inch card will sit slightly above it, making it easy to grab. This, I'm going to cut this lid off at about 1 inch or so, give or take. That doesn't really matter a whole lot as long as it's above this divider. And then all I really did was squared off the end here. These are the dimensions. This is going to be 2 5/8 on either side here where our cards are going to sit, which should leave you with 3/8 of an inch, give or take, in the middle. You can make something smaller than 3/8 of an inch if you want. You can't go a whole lot bigger, as I want 2 1/2-inch cards sitting in a 2 5/8-inch slot so we can get them out. Be very careful when you're finishing this not to blow through the end of your bottom there. It can be a real disaster. We're on the home stretch here. We got to finish a few things before we glue it together. The first is going to be final sanding of the internals here. Now I go really high. My grits are going to be 150 by hand to get rid of some planer marks. Some people may not have to deal with that. 150 by hand, again, very delicately deliberate. Then 220 by hand. Then I'm going to very gently braze over it with 320 on a random orbit sander, 400 by hand, then burnishing with quadruple aught steel wool. You can do this however you want. All I want to say is be very careful not to round over the sides if you're using a random orbit sander or any type of power sander, and try to remove a roughly even amount from all of these. Miters glue together best when they're all the same thickness, and if you start rounding things over, there are going to be gaps and it's not going to line up well. It will still glue together fine. There will just be noticeable aesthetic visual problems at the end. So be very careful when you're sanding. After we have all of these final sanded to whatever the grit you want to go to is, then we will cut the base in the lid to fit, and there's some really easy tricks to do that. After we have these together, we're going to begin practice kind of testing, taping it up, and with it taped up, we will cut the divider groove out and sand that to fit. That way we know 100% for sure that when we go to apply the glue in there, everything will close. We do not want to be in panic stations running to the table saw or whatever to cut something or shave something off when we have glue on there. You can see some planer marks here I'm going to remove. One thing I want to point out is be very gentle when you are sanding along the edges of these. If you start rounding these corners over when you glue it together, it may not be a gap, but it will look like a gap because there will be kind of a darker spot internally there. So if you want to sand hard, go wild in this middle area. Just don't go wild on these edges here or it will look like there is a gap. Once you've got the insides of all four pieces sanded, it's now time to cut down the lid and the base to their appropriate dimensions. And the easiest way to do this is to actually just hold the base in the groove and mark it out. And what we want to make sure here is if we're using solid wood, leave room for expansion. And I'm talking 3/32. These grooves aren't deep, so we don't have a ton of room to play with here. If they were deeper grooves and it was wider, 1/8 of an inch is something I'd leave, but closer to 3/32 here, really you can kind of come in and just eyeball it and just take a notch off of either side. So I'll bring you in here and we'll look at this. I'm going to begin with my base here. And the area I'm looking at for getting the measurement right are the tips of these grooves here, not the outside and not the inside. It's the tips of these. That's how far it goes in, which is also equivalent to the depth. So I can come in and I can just kind of line my piece up. Sometimes if you do not care about the aesthetics, just place it on the end of one of these, line it up directly with that, and then go to the other side, find that end point coming up, and then subtract about a 1/16 of an inch. And that will be where you're going to start. And we will do a test fit afterwards to make sure we can always shave more off. Don't go wild on this early one. You don't want to take too much off and have it just flop out. We'll do the same thing with the side pieces for the top and the bottom. This is an example of what I would consider the perfect amount of room left on the width side here. This side is all the way over touching, and there is somewhere between a 1/16 and a little under a 32nd, somewhere in there left. That's going to work just right for this size box. We will be using a little glue in the dead center inside this groove to pin this so that it can expand left and right and it won't wobble around. Once you've got the fit right on the base and the lid, go ahead and do the final sanding on this to your last grit. Get it ready so that we can glue it up. We're going to be getting out the blue tape and kind of dry run assembling this so that we can get the fit exactly right on the divider piece. Our final step is going to be making the internal divider and getting that ready for the glue up. Now, personally, I don't have any concerns about wood expansion here for two reasons. One, I'm gluing nothing on this divider. It's just going to sit right in there and float. Number two, the grain is running the same direction up and down, and it is the same species from the same board, but otherwise, they're all running the same way. I don't have any real concerns. If you do, however, you can make, what do I want to call this? It's like a non or a partially shouldered tenon, something like that. I'll bring it in here really close, where you essentially cut out a partial tenon. It sits in there. The top is then still flush with the side. Don't glue it. It can expand and contract, but I don't really have any concerns about this because it is going to be running the same direction and it should expand and contract together, and we're not going to glue it. This is what I mean by kind of a partial shoulder tenon. There's no shoulder on the sides here, and in this case you wouldn't even have necessarily the bottom one. You would just have this top shoulder. This groove would sit in, or this tenon would sit in the groove, so that you would have all this room for it to move up and down. I don't think this is necessary, but if you are at all concerned, go ahead and do something like this. Now, the way I'm going to take this measurement, and it will probably require some fine tuning here, as I'm simply going to look at what is the distance it has to span across. Well, I know it's going to be the internal dimension of my shorter sides plus the depth times 2 of my groove, so 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to match it just to that to start, and then I'm going to put the blue tape on, close it all up, see if it fits. If it doesn't, or if I have any concerns, I'll shave a little off. Ideally, we don't cut too much off here. I think I've got this right, so now I'm going to prep all this with blue tape and do a test fit and see if it closes well, if it moves around, whatever. Any issues, we'll deal with it now before we glue it up. Now, to nail this final fit, we're going to do two things here. We're essentially going to do our glue up, but stop part of the way through before we put glue on, and then we're going to sand this to our final grit. This should have been sanded ahead of time to the second to last final grit. So do your final grit sanding on this, and then we are going to fold this up, but we are going to leave the bottom, or the top out of there so we can see inside. So the way I like to glue these up, straight edge of some sort, even if it's just a 12-inch ruler, line them all up in order, all of the bottoms facing away from you. Then you come into each edge and you put blue tape over it. I've got 3 pieces of blue tape on each, and I will add more after I get it, the glue in there. And then we're gonna flip it back over. This should keep itself in line. And then to test fit here, we need the bottom, that's for sure, but we're gonna leave the top out for now, and we're going to put this in, put the groove in, or the divider in the groove, and then see if it closes. If it closes well and everything looks fine, then we can go ahead and glue this up. If it does not close well, if something's keeping it from either fitting in there lengthwise, widthwise, whatever it is, we'll trim it down. Maybe it's even a little kind of skewed off center, in which case a little bit of sanding may help adjust for that. Whatever you need to do, get it done now so that when we put the glue in there, it actually all closes and we know for sure it's going to close. On my first test close here, I can't quite close this last miter, which means it is too long. That is my problem here. The base seems to fit fine. I have the height, what I believe to be fine. So I'm just a little too long. I'm gonna shave some off. I've got my fit. I'm pretty happy with it. It may still be a little tight. I may shave a little off, but here are the dimensions: 4 and 23/32 by 4 and 8/32. Now, yours may be a little different on the height. I've got a bit of a cup in my base, so it's pressing it up in the middle, which means it has to be actually a little shorter than it would normally be from the base groove. So this is why we do all of the test fitting. You could also, if you want, kind of sand a little hump into this, something like that. If you're using plywood for the base and you don't have this problem, yours is going to need to be a little taller if you made the exact groove size. Now, before we glue this up, if you are not the kind of person that keeps detailed notes and dimensions or anything like that, go ahead and make a mark on the outside of the box exactly where that divider is, because when we go to cut the lid off, if you've forgotten, or if you made yours a different size than mine, you don't want to lop it off. So make a mark somewhere out there. We won't be able to see inside. This is going to be glued totally closed together. We don't want to lop it off. I have a whole in-depth video on gluing up miters, so I'm going to keep this short. If you are at all confused, go to my channel. It's on there. I think it's just called Gluing Up Miters or something like that. I paint on a 2-to-1 water to glue ratio. Make sure your glue is water soluble. I paint it on the end grain everywhere. I let it soak in. I'm looking for it to be a damp color before I apply normal strength glue. With the end grain and miters, we do have some concerns about the cells. What am I looking for here? Soaking in all of the grain, soaking in all of the glue. So I like the theory that we can pre-fill a little bit with some watered down glue. Some people, they're like, we've been gluing things together for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years without painting on pre-watered glue. They don't do it. That's fine. I paint it on, I wait, I make sure it looks damp. I apply a little more if needed. Then I go back and I apply full strength glue, paint it on there. I take a little look at it, maybe wait 30 seconds, see if it disappears. If it doesn't disappear, I go ahead and close it. One thing I would warn is that when you close together the box, it's going to want to squeeze the glue in. So when you're applying glue, don't leave a bunch of glue kind of sitting right near the edge, or it will 100% squeeze in, and you cannot go in there and clean it out ahead of time. You know, you can't get in there until it's fully dried and we cut it open. So you're not going to have the ability to do a straw. You will have to, at that point, chisel it out of there. So be mindful of how much glue. We are going to spline this, so we will be adding some extra strength to it as well. Just be careful. It's going to be tricky with the divider in there to get a chisel in there and chisel it out. Well, it's day 5. This has been glued for 15, 18 hours. I don't know, something like that. Got a bit of an earlier start tonight. It is not 1 a.m., give or take. Here is the order of what we're going to do today in case you skip around. 1, we're going to remove this blue tape and we're going to kind of see what the joints look like. 2, we're going to make sure the bottom and top are flat because we will then be splining this, and for it to rotate correctly and have them line up nicely, it's important that the bottom and top are flat. A lot of times when you're doing the blue tape method, and you're pulling really hard to get it around, it can cause these to shift a little bit. It happens, and oftentimes you're in a bit of a, I don't want to say panic rush, but you're trying to get that extra layer of tape on there, you yank, you don't notice it. Anyways, I love to glue down some sandpaper 150 grit to remove material pretty fast onto some MDF, clamp it down, and just kind of swish this guy around, something like that. Once we're happy with how it sits, we will then do any kind of 150 grit sanding we need to get any glue off. For the splines, we also want it to sit flat, so if you've got any squeeze out on the outside, we will clean that off, get a little bit of a rough sanding done. At that point, we will then lay out the splines and cut the splines. I'm gonna say right now, if you don't wanna make a spline jig, if you don't have a spline jig, if you don't like the look of splines, I think for this piece and this function, it would be okay to not do splines. It's not going to be getting tossed around, moved a lot. In theory, it's sitting somewhere, you're opening it up, you're taking a reminder card out. I think it'll be totally fine without splines. I've got plenty of boxes like this with no splines, and they're going nowhere. I just want the look of splines on this for myself personally. So if the look doesn't interest you or you don't want to make the jig, skip ahead after this part. Once we've got the splines in there, we're going to do more sanding. We're definitely going to do then 150 sanding to get everything nice and flat and ready. We'll do 220 sanding after that. Now, I'll call it second to last grit because I go much higher than most people. For me, 220 sanding. Then we will cut the lid off. We will flatten the lid, make sure everything looks good, table saw or bandsaw, however you want to do that. Then we will do the hinges. We'll take the hinges off, do a final sanding, put the hinges back on, finish. Add the finish. We're not actually finished at that point. We then do the finish, and then we're finished. Now, if you're like me and you made a lot of markings on the top and bottom, especially ones that tell you which is the top and which is the bottom, if you need to go sand this to get this level, just know that those are going to come off. So I highly suggest at this point you put some kind of marking on the bottom. I just like to sign my work. Just sign your work on the bottom. Then when we go to split the lid off, you're not going to accidentally cut the bottom off thinking it's the top because this looks the same from either side. So just be careful with that right now and then sand those off and you won't have to worry about it. I was just starting to do the kind of sanding to get the pencil marks and some glue off, and I figured I'd show you before how the miters turned out. I think they turned out really well. A little bit of glue squeeze out, but not bad. Fairly tight up there too. A little tiny little gap in there, but overall, really happy with how those turned out. It's now time to do the splines. So let's have a little check-in here. We've got this, the top and the bottom are sanded so that it is nice and flat, or maybe you didn't have to do that, maybe nothing shifted when it glued up. You've done some rough sanding to get any kind of glue bumps, anything to make the sides uneven off of there. I just did 150 over this whole thing, obviously not touching the top or the bottom with sandpaper because it's very hard to get back in. Some way of noting what your bottom is, I suggest is signing your name with a little, year kind of mark on it. So if you look back in a long time, or anybody does, they know who built this and when. And then we're also going to make a mark right now of where we are going to cut off our line. Now I'm going an inch down from the top. I'm just going to take it off there on the bandsaw. I'm going to cut on the other side of the 1 inch mark. And then the spline layout will be highly subjective, to be honest. It's an aesthetics-based thing. I'm going to have, I think, 3 sets of 2. So I'm going to use a thin kerf blade. So they're about 3/32 of an inch. So 3 sets of 2 splines, one directly in the middle and then the other kind of off to the top. That's totally up to you. If you just want to put 2 in there or just 3 single, anything, just make sure you note where you're going to cut it off before and space them out on the other side of that. And then we will head to the table and do the splines. I know this is a little hard to see, but I wanted to just show you my spline layout here and my logic. I'm going to have one that's 3/8 of an inch down, 3/4 of an inch down, and I will be centering the table saw blade on the line. That is going to be mirrored down here. Okay, no problem. Then I wanted two that were the same distance apart of 3/8 of an inch, but split down what will be the center. And I say will be the center because when I cut this, based on my bandsaw, I'm removing about a 1/16 of an inch plus a little bit after sanding to remove the bandsaw marks. So I shifted down this center 1/16 and a little extra. So essentially I just made a mark up here that's a 1/16 of an inch shorter, then get the center between that and the bottom, and then use that to reference 3/16 off of either side for that 3/8 of an inch split. To me, that makes sense. That should be in the middle after we end up cutting this off, so we'll see. But those are mine. It's just an aesthetic choice. You can do it however you want. I've got my spline jig all set up here, and I just wanted to make a note about the depth of cut. We have to be careful not to accidentally cut through the wood and have splines kind of sticking out on the inside. So just make sure your saw blade is well below or just clear of this corner inside here. I like to leave extra room. The depth of this determines also how wide they are. So the deeper in you go, the further up, the wider they'll be. The further down you go, the narrower they'll be. So that's another aesthetic choice. I'm going to go probably right about there and just call it good. Make sure when you're doing this to rotate this blade to find the highest point so you get it correct. Once we've got the splines cut, we just have an aesthetic choice. What color do you want to do here? I'm going to go with mahogany with this elm. I've never tried the look together. I want to experiment, see what it looks like. Always go classic light and dark if you are unsure. Lighter wood, darker splines, darker wood, lighter splines. It always hits well. It's, you know, kind of boom in your face. It always works. You can't go wrong. That doesn't mean it's always the right combination, but it's never a bad combination. I cut these out on the bandsaw. I've used the table saw in the past. If I had more to do, I would probably do it on the table saw because it's a little quicker. I don't worry about the bottom having that rough bandsaw kind of cut edge onto it. You'll never know once you press them in there. And speaking of pressing, we're looking for a pressure fit with our thumbs here. I don't love the idea of having to whack this 24 times with a mallet. I will stand behind that these miters, if you've done them right, will hold up in normal use without splines. I'm not going to stand up behind the idea that you could smash this thing 24 times with a mallet and it will hold up. So I'll show you the fit here in a sec once I cut mine out and you can get a good idea. Once we put glue in there, it will fill up space and get tighter. But we'd really like to nail these since they do add a little bit of extra strength, and why not have that extra strength in there as well as the aesthetics. At the expense of a bandsaw blade, I have got the fit I'm looking for. This didn't cause this. This is old and I should have changed it out a while ago, but we did lose a good one today. So I'll bring you in here and we'll take a look at this fit so you can get a really good idea of what you're looking for. When I refer to a pressure fit, this is what I'm talking about. I can line it up, 2 fingers, put it in there, and it's done. I don't have to mallet it in there. You can hear that little kind of fitting noise. Once we add glue, that's going to get tighter. So honestly, if you want, maybe even sand a little more off the back of this, but if you stop it right here, you will be able to get it in there as long as you have 2 fingers to help press. Once you are happy with the fit, we can go ahead and glue these in there. Make sure to get glue all over both surfaces. I use a little pick. It's very handy here. You should see squeeze out at least a little bit on either side when you press it in there, and that will mean you've got plenty of glue in there and it's good to go. You can either clean that up now or wait until later. I usually wait about an hour before trimming them off. I prefer the flush trim saw now. I used to use the bandsaw. There are 2 reasons I didn't love the bandsaw. The first is that sometimes as it was going through, it would kind of chip off part of it that wasn't in there, and it would drag a little bit of that piece with it, and you'd end up with just a chip out of the middle. Only occasionally, but enough times that I moved away from that. And then the second reason was just kind of a safety concern. On these top ones, if that blade grabs it, it will smash it down off the table and it can fly back up to you. And even if it doesn't hit you, it scares the living daylights out of you because it is loud. So go ahead and get these glued in there. I highly suggest the pull saw. Flush them up, trim them off, do a little sanding afterwards so we get everything clean, make sure there's no glue on the surface, and then we will cut the lid off. And we're back. We're going to pretend it's only an hour or so later. It's actually day 7 here. It's time to trim these off, and then we will do some sanding to make sure everything is nice and flush. Well, I did the thing I said not to do. I chipped one of them off. I, for some reason, decided to lift my saw up in the middle of cutting, and it just chipped right off of there, so I'm just gluing the little tip back in. It's not much, so it should be relatively easy to fix. If you happen to do the same, and for whatever reason decide to lift this up and it chips off, just glue the little thing right back on there. Once you've got the splines trimmed off and you've sanded it so there's no glue or anything left on there, we have kind of a dealer's choice in terms of what order. I personally like to sand this to my second to final grit, so like 220-ish for me, and then bandsaw the lid off. Plenty of people like to bandsaw the lid off and then do all of their sanding. I find it much easier to keep this all kind of flush and in a line when I do the sanding, or the vast majority of it now, then cut it off and then come back and apply the hinges before doing the final grit after that. That way everything just stays nice and together. Plenty of people will go right from this point though, cut it off on either the table saw or the bandsaw. I'm going to use the bandsaw here because this box is small enough to fit in there, and I think it's a little bit cleaner, I'll say, in an odd way when you do it on the bandsaw. So if you want to cut this first and then sand, that's totally fine. I'm going to sand first, then cut this, and there will still be one final last sanding bit at the end. I know, we're almost done with sanding. We're getting close. Well, after a series of unforeseen events in that I forgot them, my bandsaw only has 5 inches of resaw. Even though I chose the dimensions for this, I somehow forgot that the shorter side is 5 1/4, so that's just not going to work at all. Okay, fine. I'm doing it on the table saw. I do this a little bit differently than most people do, and it's for a specific reason specific to me. So the way most people do this, and you probably should do this, is that you raise the blade only a little above the thickness of these pieces of wood here, so a little bit over 3/8 of an inch, and you take this in 4 passes, rotating it each time, and on the 4th pass the lid falls off. It works pretty well. You've got to do some cleanup. Usually that's okay. The reason I have this blade so high up is that I'm going to do it in 2 passes. And that's because I need to minimize the amount of cleanup, as my splines were specifically offset to account for a 1/16 of an inch loss from a bandsaw blade. This thin kerf blade, which I already have is my thinnest one, is 3/32 of an inch. So I'm already playing with fire on having bad looking spacing. And one thing I've noticed with this saw is that the riving knife is meant for thick kerf blades. So it oftentimes, when resawing on this, if I don't have a thick kerf blade in there, which is going to lose me 1/8 of an inch, that's way too much, we'll pull the back corner on the final cut, so the 4th pass, it will pull it sort of in and down as it's falling off. It doesn't shoot back, it just barely grazes the teeth, but it has a bad habit of leaving a little tooth mark there on the end, and I notice it's much worse when I do it in 4 thin passes than when I do it in 2. So specifically for me, I am going to do this in 2. You should probably do this in 4 with a much lower blade height. Safety police, I know you're not going to love this, but this is how I'm going to do this because of bad memory and calculations. As I've said before, I am leaving 1 inch left over for the lid. That's going to be the size of the lid, so I'm cutting to the right side of the 1 inch line. As long as you clear the divider, you can kind of do whatever you want with the lid height, and just make sure you have the top on the right side here. You can cut it inside or outside. I like to have the thicker part on the inside, but don't accidentally cut through the bottom and cut your divider off and ruin the project. I'm super happy with how that went. Very minimal kind of problems with blade marks or anything. I've got a little bit of tear out here, which can happen when the saw blade is doing that kind of directional yank down from the side. That's okay. I'm going to put down some sandpaper on a flat surface, MDF, rub them around until they're nice and clean, and then we will do the hinges. I do suggest if your box has relatively nondescript grain or you can't tell the difference on the sides, that you make some little mark as to which side is the front or back. A lot of times when we do hand sanding on the outside afterwards, we don't get it perfectly even, so a little mark to let you know which way it goes can be really helpful. And then we will just get rid of it right at the end after we've put the hinges on, so that we already know then where it is. Today is day 7 or maybe day 8, I'm not sure. Once we have the kind of mating surfaces nice and flat and everything closes nicely, we need to sand this to the second to last grit and then apply our hinges. Now, when it comes to hinges, we have some very divergent paths here, and there are 3 things I consider. 1, who is this for? Is it for me? Is it for a gift? Is it for something important? 2, do I want to spend money that may not need to be spent? And three, what is my skill level? Let's begin with number 1. It's for me. So number 2, I'm not going to spend a ton of money on nice hinges. Nice hinges are very expensive, but they are worth it if you are giving it to someone. They look much better, they last longer, they function better. And then 3, when it comes to my skill level, I'm not particularly consistent when it comes to inlaying hinges. I've got numerous things around here which I've done them successfully, and I've got numerous things around here where I've blown out the back and I've ended up slapping hinges on the back anyway. I just am not good enough at consistently doing it. I don't practice it enough to do it. So I'm going to do the most basic method and just put 2 on the back. I'm going to use these unbelievably cheap Chinese hinges. They will bend if you stare at them too hard, but they do function as a hinge. It's totally fine. For me, this is just sitting in a drawer. It's going to open up. I'm going to pick the card out. I'm going to close it. I don't need it to look amazing. I don't need those hinges inlaid in there. If you have that skill, though, I think inlaying the hinges really does kind of take a project up a level. It's an extra nice touch if you do it correctly. And I would do it if you know how to do it and you can do it well and you don't have to worry about blowing out the back. If it's not for a gift or super important, I wouldn't spend a ton of money on hinges. I just don't believe in spending money when you don't necessarily have to. So I'm gonna get this sanded to the second to last grit. And then the way I apply these is I just kind of line it up on a flat surface. I clamp these together. I lay the hinge on there, make the marks, drill it out, screw the hinges in, and it's good to go, I guess. We'll see how it turns out. I was just starting to attach these hinges and I forgot we now want to do our final sanding. We'll put them on there. I often just put the finish on with the hinges on there and then use my air compressor to blow it out. It's up to you. You could final sand, finish now, and put the hinges on afterwards, however you want to do it. But we are almost done with the box itself, and then making the cards will be really quick. I'm on my final step here, and anyone who's watched my linseed oil video or elevating your linseed oil or any of my project videos will know that I love to burnish things as my last grit. Quadruple hot steel wool, it's very important that it is that one. And we're just using friction and heat buildup to kind of braze down on the fibers, and it leaves a really nice sheen, almost a semi-gloss-like sheen. But the benefit is that I can then use a boiled linseed oil finish. So I get the idiot-proof ability of boiled linseed oil. I love simple finishes. I don't enjoy that much film finishes, so I love the oil. I get the sheen from this. But there's been 2 updates to my routine that I wanted to share here. The first is, I don't know if they changed the formulation, but I started getting metal splinters one day, and they were unbelievably annoying to pick out, so I just wear Harbor Freight latex gloves now. That has solved the problem. The next is, it's a little annoying to try to clean this stuff up. It eventually, if you rub enough, it will break off, sever, and it gets all over the place. And I don't like vacuuming it up. It's probably not healthy for the filter. Just grab some magnets. If you have any of these relatively cheap neodymium magnets lying around for, maybe you made a chisel rack, whatever it is, and just wave it over the thing, it picks it right up. I go to the trash can, I give it a shake, and it falls right off. Job done. Once you're happy with the final sanding grit here, you can either choose to finish the box now, and if you're doing some kind of spray finish or something, start it now because it may take multiple coats, or painting something on it's going to take multiple coats, whatever it is. Or like me, you can wait until afterwards and apply the finish as well to the cards if you're using the same thing. I have a couple thoughts on the cards, one thing I'm going to do, and then three things that I think could be really cool. The first thing, obviously, is the basic pen or pencil. Easy to remove, even just like a single swipe of a hand plane, and you could replace what is written on there, let alone maybe an eraser with a pencil. So if you're not sure on like the permanence of these, consider that option. Very easy to change. The second option is what I'm going to do, and that's going to be to paint them. Some acrylic paint, not the most durable thing in the world, but I think it'll stand out nicely, and it's easy. It's relatively easy. Just write out the lines and then paint over it. The third option, if you are into wood burning, would be to wood burn. I got this a long time ago, and I've tried it many times, and I'm absolutely terrible at it. It never looks good. It always looks bad. But if you are good at wood burning, this would be a perfect wood burning project to write your reminders on the wood burn. And then the final one, which I think could look really good, and if I was giving this to somebody, I would at least attempt this. It would be to take a darker wood and a lighter wood, cut the darker wood to about 1/8, the lighter wood to about 1/16. I would then get the scroll saw out, and I would cut out what the reminders are going to be if I know ahead of time, which is maybe a little hard, but you may have to dig for some information if this is a gift. Cut those out and then glue them together so that the lighter wood is underneath and it will show right through. I think that could be a chef's kiss kind of touch if you know the reminders that you're going to want to give to somebody. It's going to be a gift that they're not going to get anywhere else. I'm not going to walk through all of this here. We covered the resaw technique earlier. That's how, if I didn't already have these, and that's how most of these were made. This was table saw and resaw. Just do that at about 3/16 of an inch, or the bandsaw if you want to go that route. That's totally fine. I'm going to just put a light round over on everything with my sander. There's not really enough thickness for a profile that can be seen easily. And that's really it. I'm going to then just paint the ends on, and we will come back when I've got that done and apply the finish and see how it looks. Well, it's the final day, which I think is day 8 or 9. I'm not entirely sure anymore. I've got everything done. I'm ready to apply the finish. Then I'm going to stick the hinges on. I ended up having more room than cards. I wanted to leave space, of course, so this is bigger than what I knew I'd need to be. I ended up, to fill space, just making some of these little half-lap X's. You can turn them in different directions to fill up less or more space, so it really works out well, and it still gives you the ability to flip through them. I'm super happy with this build. This is the final point. Sign your work. I'm always advocating for signing your work, unless you're like a spy and you're giving this to your Parisian lover or something and you don't want anyone to know. So I'm going to throw some boiled linseed oil. You can do this however you want. Let's get this on there. I'm really excited to see how this looks. Now, depending upon who you are, your reminders are going to be different. I've got a few YouTube related, edit video, make thumbnail, do some timestamps. Got some yard work related. I actually just got done power washing all the gutters to my house. I've got a mow front and a mow back. You can do whatever you want with this. It's been a long time since I've power washed, and with gutters, my shoulders are killing me. Contrary to popular belief, I do not work out. So that was the first shoulder workout I've had in about 5 years. Those mahogany splines stand out really well. I'm happy about that. I wasn't 100% sure. I thought they would, but you never know. Yeah, I'm really happy I went with that. I think that's a nice look. Well, the finish is all dry here. I'm extremely happy with how this turned out. I've got plenty of cards made. I've got room for more cards. I want to talk about a few mistakes I made really quick. Mistake number 1 I showed earlier, where I chipped a spline out due to pulling up on my pull saw while I was cutting it off. That's usually indicative of one of two things. 1, there wasn't enough glue right at that very tip, or 2, the spline actually thinned out a little bit and it didn't make solid contact. It would have been fine had I not lifted up, but of course I did, and it chipped right off. And then there was a follow-up mistake made where I thought I had the right spline piece that matched into that, but I had spline pieces all over the floor and everywhere, and I must have grabbed the wrong one because I can tell, well, I forget where it is. It's on here somewhere. There's a slight little glue line in it, and you honestly, with the finish on there, can't really tell, but it clearly wasn't the right one. It should have matched up seamlessly, and there's a little glue line which tells me that I stuck the wrong one in there. So 2 mistakes there. And then the third one is it's quite big, but it's not really noticeable, and it's that somewhere between me doing the layout lines and the layout for the hinges and clamping it together, I got the lid switched around. So it's supposed to be, this side is supposed to be on the back and this side's supposed to be on the front. Fortunately, the grain runs relatively well, so you can't really tell, but the entire lid is supposed to be the other way. So not good, pretty big mistake, to be honest. And then the third one, I think, is simply, I wish my groove for the divider was, it could be about a 64th of an inch lower. I can see there's a tiny little gap at the top there, which maybe it doesn't matter, and you can't see it unless you look at it, but it's one of those things where I love tight fitting kind of grooves and things going into them. So I'll call it a mistake. It's really just a minor, it's a minor annoyance. Overall though, for 8, 9, whatever number of days of work this is, I'm very happy with it. It's functional for me. I think it looks nice. I was very happy with how the mahogany splines turned out. I think they really complement it without needing to be the normal kind of walnut or maple splines in there. So thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions or any ways that you improved this or you think it could be improved, please let me know. Bye.